The suburban streets of Maple Ridge were exactly what Your Name had been searching for: quiet, picturesque, and filled with perfectly manicured lawns. It was the kind of neighborhood where the birds sang at dawn, and the mailman waved as he passed. There was no noise, no chaos, just the gentle hum of ordinary life. And for someone who'd spent years immersed in the high-stakes world of government operations, it was a welcome change. The perfect place to disappear, blend in, and enjoy a semblance of peace. But all of that changed the moment Karen Hill knocked on their door. It was a morning like any other. The sun was barely up, casting a soft glow over the neighborhood, and the scent of fresh-cut grass lingered in the air. Your Name had just finished a quiet breakfast when the doorbell rang. Expecting nothing more than a neighbor offering cookies or a misplaced package, they opened the door without hesitation. Standing there was Karen Hill, the president of the Homeowners Association, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper smile. She was impeccably dressed in her usual power suit, her heels clicking against the pavement as she stepped forward with a purpose. "Good morning," she said, her tone as sweet as honey. "I'm Karen Hill, president of the HOA. I'm here to discuss a matter concerning your property." Your Name felt a flicker of unease, but the mask of politeness never wavered. "Of course, what's the issue?" Without waiting for an invitation, Karen handed over a legal-looking envelope, her fingers brushing against Your Name's hand. The paper felt heavy, as though it held more than just the usual HOA paperwork. The words "Violation Notice" were boldly printed across the top in black ink. "Seems you've fallen behind on the rules," Karen continued, her smile never fading, but her eyes calculating. "This is your first warning. Fix it, or we'll be forced to take more drastic action. And trust me, you don't want that." Your Name glanced down at the notice, trying to make sense of the vague accusations. The rules cited were obscure, barely applicable, but that wasn't what unsettled them. It was the way Karen was standing, the way she seemed to be watching them, as if she was already anticipating their response. "Thank you. I'll review it and get back to you," Your Name said, trying to hide their growing sense of discomfort. But Karen wasn't finished. Her smile tightened just a fraction, and she leaned in ever so slightly, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'll be keeping a close eye on you," she said, her words laced with something far more sinister than mere authority. "And if you think you're going to ignore the rules, well, I'm not the only one who's watching." The chill in her voice sent a shiver down Your Name's spine, though they masked it well. Karen turned on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the sidewalk. But Your Name didn't close the door immediately. Instead, they stood in the doorway, staring after her as she disappeared down the street. That feeling, the one they couldn't shake, the nagging sense that something was off, lingered in the air long after she was gone. There was more to this than just a simple HOA dispute. Much more. And for reasons they couldn't explain, Your Name couldn't shake the feeling that Karen Hill was hiding something far darker than rules and regulations. As the door clicked shut, Your Name felt the weight of the envelope in their hand, and a single thought echoed in their mind. This was just the beginning. The days after Karen Hill's visit passed in a haze of unease. At first, Your Name tried to shake off the feeling that something was off. After all, it was just an HOA dispute, right? The sort of thing that happened to every homeowner at some point. But the more they thought about it, the more they realized how much Karen's words had lingered in their mind, each one echoing like a distant warning bell. The following morning, as Your Name sat by the window, sipping coffee and trying to shake the restlessness that had crept into their bones, they noticed something strange. Karen was standing across the street, her eyes trained on their house. The usual suburban calm seemed a bit too quiet. The silence was palpable, but Karen's unwavering gaze cut through it like a knife. Your Name felt a jolt in their chest. Had she been watching them this whole time? It wasn't as though Karen had a reason to be outside. She didn't live anywhere near here. But there she was, standing perfectly still, arms crossed, just watching. The hairs on the back of your name's neck stood on end. Minutes passed before she finally turned and walked away. Your name tried to brush it off, but the feeling of being observed was unsettling. They had been in the CIA long enough to know when someone was watching, and that look in Karen's eyes, something about it didn't sit right. Later that afternoon, the second knock came. This time, it wasn't a notice. No, Karen had decided to visit in person again, and this time, her smile was gone. She didn't even bother to greet your name with pleasantries. She came straight to the point, her words clipped and sharp. "You've ignored the warning," Karen said, stepping into the doorway with no invitation. "You're in violation again. Your lawn is too long, your paint's chipped, and if you don't fix it, I'll have no choice but to escalate things." There was no ambiguity this time. The veiled threats from her first visit were gone, replaced by a raw, almost predatory urgency in her tone. Your name stood their ground, hiding the unease twisting in their gut. "I haven't received any official notice yet," they said, keeping their voice even. "I've been busy, and I'll address it soon enough." But Karen wasn't listening. She leaned in closer, eyes narrowing, her voice dropping to a near whisper, as if sharing a secret. "I'm not just here to remind you about the lawn," she said. "I know you've been investigating. I know what you've been looking for." The blood in your name's veins turned to ice. How could she know? They had taken every precaution to keep their work under wraps. Their CIA operation was meant to be completely covered. But here was Karen, her words carrying the weight of a silent, unspoken threat. She knew. For a split second, everything stopped. The air around them seemed to thicken, the silence growing louder by the second. "You should tread carefully," Karen continued, her voice almost sweet again. But there was an edge to it. "I'll be watching you." Before your name could respond, she turned sharply and walked back to her car, leaving them standing there with the overwhelming sense that this wasn't about a lawn. This wasn't about an HOA. This was something far, far darker. As Karen's car disappeared down the street, your name's mind raced. The tension that had been building was no longer a faint feeling. It was a reality. Karen wasn't just meddling with HOA rules. She was part of something bigger, something they hadn't fully uncovered yet. But now, the stakes were higher, much higher. And somehow, Karen knew it all. The days dragged on, but the unease in the air never lifted. If anything, it grew thicker, more suffocating with each passing moment. Your name couldn't shake the feeling that Karen Hill was watching them, closer than ever. It wasn't just her behavior, it was the subtle changes in the neighborhood itself. Strange things that might have seemed insignificant to an outsider, but to someone trained to notice the smallest of details, they were impossible to ignore. At night, your name would sit in the shadows of their living room, peering through the blinds, watching the street outside. It had become a habit now, a compulsion. The ordinary houses lining the street all looked the same, but there was something undeniably off. The cars parked along the curb, some of them unfamiliar, had started to appear at odd hours. People who didn't belong, people who seemed to be lurking. They would come and go, slipping through the neighborhood like ghosts. One night, as a dark sedan pulled up near the end of the street, your name felt a surge of instinctual unease. They knew they had to act quickly. Pulling on a hoodie, they slipped out of the house, blending into the shadows as they crept toward the parked car. From a distance, they could see two figures inside, speaking in low, hurried voices. One of the figures, tall, thin, with a face shadowed by a cap, was none other than Karen's associate, the same person who had been lurking near her house the day they first met. But it wasn't just the man's presence that felt ominous. It was the content of the conversation. "She's getting too close," the man said, his voice harsh. "If she keeps poking around, she might expose everything." The words struck your name, like a punch to the gut. Who was he talking about? Was it them? And then came the chilling part. Get rid of her. The voice added, cold and casual. Make it look like an accident. We can't afford to have her digging into things she doesn't understand. Your name's heart pounded in their chest. Her. Was it a reference to them? The blood rushed in their ears as the realization hit them like a freight train. Karen wasn't just an overbearing HOA president. She wasn't just a meddling neighbor with too much time on her hands. She was part of something much darker. A criminal operation with roots far deeper than they could have ever imagined. Suddenly, the neighborhood that had once seemed like a sanctuary turned into a labyrinth of shadows, every corner hiding a new danger. Your name's instincts screamed that they needed to leave, to get as far away from this situation as possible. But they were CIA, trained for moments like these. They weren't about to back down. Still, the question loomed. What was Karen involved in? What were they really protecting? Your name knew they had to dig deeper. The danger was closing in, and with each passing moment, it felt like the walls were closing in tighter around them. But there was no turning back now. They had already seen too much, heard too much. And the one thing they knew for certain was that Karen Hill was hiding something far more sinister than anyone could have guessed. The pieces were starting to come together, painfully slowly, but with undeniable clarity. Whatever Karen and her network were involved in, it was bigger than just a petty HOA squabble. This was something that had the potential to ruin everything. And your name was right in the middle of it. The next day, the sense of foreboding was thicker than ever. Your name couldn't stop replaying the conversation they overheard in the darkened street. Get rid of her. The words echoed in their mind, chilling and unmistakable. Whatever Karen was mixed up in, it wasn't just about a few rules or neighborhood squabbles. It was about something far more dangerous, something they had only begun to understand. The CIA training kicked in. They began to move carefully, observing every little detail. The neighborhood, once so tranquil, had become a minefield. Every unfamiliar car, every strange person, was a potential threat. Your name couldn't afford to slip up. They had to stay one step ahead of Karen and whoever else was involved in this mess. And then, just as your name thought they might have a handle on things, a knock came again, sharp, insistent. They opened the door, expecting more of the same. But Karen's presence was even more unsettling than before. She stood there, no longer the smiling, confident neighbor, but something colder, more calculating. Her eyes locked onto theirs, piercing, as though searching for any hint of defiance. I gave you a warning, Karen said, her tone flat, her words deliberate. I don't like repeating myself. The smile that followed didn't reach her eyes. It was a mask, thinly veiled with fake sweetness. Your name stood still, their body tense. They knew they couldn't let her see their reaction. I've been busy. I'll get to the lawn and the paint soon, they said, trying to keep their voice steady. But Karen's eyes narrowed, and she took a deliberate step closer. The air between them seemed to grow colder, heavier. No, you're not getting it, she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. You're not going to fix it. Not unless you follow the rules. Or else. She leaned in even closer, her breath cold on their face. I'm giving you one last chance. Either you comply or, well, let's just say things will get a lot more difficult for you. There was an unspoken threat in her words, something that sent an uncomfortable shiver down your name's spine. But it wasn't just her words that made the warning so chilling. It was the way she said it, like she already knew how far she could push before someone cracked. And then it happened. As if to punctuate her threat, Karen reached into her bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. She handed it over, her fingers brushing against your name's skin once more. This is your final warning, she said flatly. If you think this is just about HOA rules, you're mistaken. We're watching you. Your name froze, the folder heavy in their hands. They opened it slowly, their mind racing as they skimmed the contents. documents detailing their every move over the past few weeks. Someone had been watching them all along, someone who knew exactly where they'd been and what they'd been doing. The walls were closing in. Karen wasn't just threatening them. She was playing a game, one where the stakes were life and death. A chill ran down your name's spine. They realized too late that Karen had known more than they could ever have imagined. She wasn't just a nuisance. She was a player in something much darker. Before your name could react, Karen turned on her heel and walked away, leaving them standing in the doorway, the weight of the folder burning in their hands. As she disappeared down the street, your name couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just their lawn or paint that was in danger. It was their life. And Karen Hill was far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. The folder lay on the table, its contents strewn across the surface like pieces of a puzzle that didn't make sense. Your name couldn't stop staring at the pages, heart hammering in their chest. Each sheet contained details, things only someone who had been watching them could know. From every trip to the store to the late-night phone calls, it was all there. Every single movement, recorded with eerie precision. Whoever was behind this knew everything. And it wasn't just Karen Hill. There was a larger force at play, one that had been lurking in the shadows from the very beginning. The documents were like a cold slap to the face, a reminder that they were no longer in control. Someone else had the power now, someone who wasn't afraid to play dirty. The feeling of paranoia settled in like a thick fog. Every noise outside, every rustle of leaves in the wind, felt like a whisper of something threatening. The walls of the house felt smaller, as though the very air was closing in on them. Your name didn't know how much longer they could keep up the act. How long could they pretend to be just another ordinary person in the neighborhood? How long before Karen, or someone worse, decided they were too much of a risk? A knock at the door shattered the silence. And for a moment, your name froze. The feeling was immediate. Something in their gut told them that this wasn't just another HOA visit. This time, the stakes were different. They didn't open the door immediately. Instead, they slid the folder under a pile of papers, hoping to hide it from view. Their pulse quickened, the anxiety building. They had to be careful. They had to stay calm. When they opened the door, they were met not with Karen, but with someone much more unexpected. A man in a dark suit, his face impassive and unreadable. His eyes were cold, trained on them with a calculating gaze that felt like it could strip away every defense they had. "Are you your name?" the man asked, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, one that carried an undeniable weight. Your name nodded slowly, their mind racing for an exit strategy, any way to escape this confrontation. But there was nowhere to run. They were trapped. The man stepped forward, crossing the threshold without waiting for an invitation. He didn't seem to care about the privacy of their home or the unwelcome intrusion. Everything about him screamed authority, and for the first time, your name felt small, like a puppet in a game they didn't fully understand. "We've been watching you," the man continued, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You've been asking too many questions, digging where you shouldn't, and that needs to stop." Your name's heart raced. Was he part of Karen's operation? "I'm not sure what you mean," they said, trying to remain composed despite the rising tide of panic. "I'm just trying to live my life." The man's lips curled into a thin, humorless smile. "You've been asking about things you don't understand, and it's becoming a problem. We can't allow that." A cold shiver ran down your name's spine. This wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And for the first time, they realized just how dangerous this situation had become. "You have two choices," the man said, his tone as cold as ice. "You can stop digging, stay out of our way, and keep playing nice. Or," he paused, letting the words hang in the air, the weight of them settling over your name, like a dark cloud, "or we'll take care of the problem." The man stepped back toward the door, his eyes never leaving your name's face. I suggest you think carefully. Before your name could react, the man turned and left, disappearing into the quiet of the street. The door clicked shut with a finality that seemed to echo in the empty room. For a long moment, your name stood there, heart pounding in their chest. The walls were closing in, tighter and tighter, with no way out. The game had changed. They weren't just dealing with an overzealous neighbor anymore. Whoever was behind this had power, real power, and they weren't afraid to use it. Now the question was, what would your name do next? The only thing they knew for sure was that they couldn't back down. Not now. Not when they were this close to uncovering the truth. But with each passing moment, it became clear that the danger wasn't just outside their door. It was already inside. And Karen Hill, she was just the tip of the iceberg. The silence in the house was deafening after the man in the suit left. Your name stood frozen for a long moment, the adrenaline coursing through their veins like a wildfire. The room felt smaller, suffocating. They couldn't shake the image of the man's cold eyes and the weight of his words. We'll take care of the problem. They knew one thing for certain. The situation was spiraling out of control, and they were no longer in charge. This was no longer just about a neighbor's complaint or an HOA dispute. This was a coordinated effort by someone much more dangerous, someone who was willing to do whatever it took to silence your name. But they weren't about to back down. Taking a deep breath, your name moved quickly. The folder, the documents, the evidence. They couldn't risk leaving it where it was. With trembling hands, they gathered the pages together and stuffed them into a safe place, locked away where no one could get to it. They needed a plan. They needed to understand what they were up against, and that meant they had to dig deeper. As they went over the details in their mind, something nagged at the back of their brain. Karen, the man in the suit, the people in the neighborhood who seemed to be more than ordinary residents. Everything was connected. But how? Suddenly, the sound of a car engine rumbled outside, breaking the stillness. It wasn't just any car. It was a black SUV, the same one they had seen before, parked down the street at odd hours. This time, it was parked directly in front of their house. Your name's heart skipped a beat. Was it them? The same people who had been following them, the ones who were watching their every move. There was no time to waste. Peeking through the blinds, your name could see two figures getting out of the SUV. They were tall, imposing, and dressed in black, their movements synchronized as though they had rehearsed this moment. They didn't belong here. Not in this neighborhood, not in this life. They weren't just part of the HOA. They were something darker, something dangerous. Without thinking, your name grabbed their phone and quickly typed a message to their contact at the CIA. I need backup. They're here. They know. They're making their move. The seconds stretched like hours as they stared at the screen, waiting for a response. The fear clawing at their chest was almost unbearable. What if it was too late? A knock at the door shattered the stillness, and your name jumped. They didn't open it immediately. There was no reason to. Not unless they knew who was on the other side. But then, the knock came again. Louder this time, more insistent. Your name's mind raced. This couldn't be a coincidence. They couldn't just sit back and wait to be caught. This was their last chance to act. In a blur of motion, they grabbed the most essential items, anything that could help them understand what Karen and her associates were really up to. They had to find out who was backing her, who had orchestrated this operation, and they had to do it now, before it was too late. They slipped out the back door, keeping low to the ground, their breath coming in shallow gasps. The air was thick with tension, but they couldn't afford to stop. Every instinct screamed that they needed to move fast, that the clock was ticking. As they rounded the corner of the house, a figure appeared in the shadows. A flash of recognition shot through them like a bolt of lightning. It was Karen. She was standing by the SUV, talking in hushed tones to one of the men in black. It wasn't just coincidence. She was in on this. The realization hit like a sucker punch. Karen wasn't a rogue HOA president. She was part of a much larger operation, and that meant every move they made was being watched. Your Name's heart pounded in their chest as they took a slow step back, trying to stay out of sight. But their foot caught on a twig, snapping it in half with a sharp crack. Karen's head whipped around, her eyes narrowing as she searched the darkness. The world seemed to freeze. The game had just changed again. This time, the stakes weren't just about keeping the secret. They were about survival. Every nerve in Your Name's body screamed to run, to flee into the night and leave the neighborhood behind. But they couldn't. Not now. Not when the truth was within reach. The figures in the SUV, the shadowy conversations, and Karen's cold threats, it all led here, to this very moment. There was no turning back. With Karen still talking to the man in black, Your Name knew they had to act quickly. The opportunity was too perfect to let slip away. Steeling themselves, they crept further into the darkness, moving with calculated precision. The sound of the conversation between Karen and her associate drifted into the night, but the words were indistinct, muffled by the distance. Your Name knew they had only seconds to get closer before the situation became even more dangerous. The cold night air bit at their skin as they crouched behind a stack of wooden pallets near the edge of the yard. Their breathing shallow but controlled. Their heart pounded in their chest, but they forced themselves to stay still, listening intently. Karen's voice suddenly became clear. We have to move fast. He's getting too close. The CIA's involvement is inevitable now, but we can still control the narrative. We need to act before it's too late. The words hit Your Name like a sucker punch. The CIA, they had always known they were trained for a reason, but now, the weight of their training and the danger they were in became all too real. Karen and her mysterious associates weren't just threats to their life. They were threats to national security. We can't afford to let him expose us, the man in black said, his voice cold and emotionless. You know what needs to be done. There it was, the unspoken truth. Whoever Karen was working with was powerful, dangerously so. They had connections, resources, and influence that stretched far beyond the confines of the neighborhood. Your Name's mind raced. If they didn't act soon, they'd be too late. Karen and her group were moving fast, and if they weren't careful, Your Name would become their next target. Carefully, Your Name pulled out their phone, texting their CIA contact again. It's worse than we thought. They're planning something big. They've been watching me. And now they're targeting me. Get here now. They hit send just as the man in black turned, his eyes scanning the yard. A cold sweat broke out on Your Name's forehead. The man was too close. If he spotted them, it would all be over. As if the universe was conspiring against them, the wind picked up, sending a branch above them creaking and groaning. In that split second, Your Name's foot shifted, causing a crunch of dry leaves. The man's head snapped in their direction, his gaze piercing through the darkness. Before he could make a move, Your Name reacted on pure instinct. They bolted, darting toward the back of that house, heart racing, every muscle screaming with the effort. Behind them, they could hear the man shout, his voice sharp and commanding. Get them. The sound of footsteps pounding the ground echoed in their ears as they pushed themselves harder, faster. They had seconds before the danger caught up with them. Bursting into the house, Your Name slammed the door shut and locked it, feeling the weight of the situation settle heavily on their chest. They grabbed the folder with all the evidence, the final piece of the puzzle, and headed straight for the basement. There they had a safe hidden in the wall, a contingency plan they hoped they would never need. As they inserted the key and opened the safe, a thought flickered in their mind. Who were these people? And more importantly, why had they targeted them? The door rattled. The sound of heavy footsteps outside grew louder. Time was running out. With trembling hands, Your Name pulled out the phone, sending one last desperate message. I have everything. Don't let me down. I'm running out of time." As the footsteps grew closer, Your Name felt a surge of determination. They were not going down without a fight. The safe clicked shut just as the door to the basement began to rattle. Your Name pressed themselves against the wall, holding their breath, praying they wouldn't be discovered. The game had reached its final stage. The basement was suffocatingly silent, save for the distant thudding of footsteps upstairs. Your Name pressed their back against the cool wall, heart hammering in their chest, barely able to breathe. The folder, now securely locked in the safe, felt like the only thing keeping them tethered to reality. Whatever Karen and her associates were planning, it was coming to a head. The CIA contact hadn't responded yet, and that chilling thought gnawed at them. What if they didn't get here in time? The footsteps stopped just outside the basement door. "Think fast," Your Name told themselves. Panic wasn't an option. They had to remain calm, composed. This was the moment of truth. No more running. A voice broke through the silence, cold and deliberate. "We know you're down there. It's over." The man in black, the one who had been following them since this nightmare started. His words were final, like the tolling of a bell. "Come out now, and we'll make this easy. Resist, and things will get unpleasant." Your Name clenched their fists, eyes darting around the dimly lit basement. They were out of time. There was no way to outrun them, no escape route left. The door behind them suddenly rattled, the sound of a key sliding into the lock. "They're coming in." The panic threatened to bubble up, but Your Name swallowed it down. They couldn't afford to lose their composure now. Moving quickly, they pulled out their phone, checking for any updates from the CIA. Nothing. It was then that the final, terrifying realization hit. The CIA wasn't coming. They never were. The realization crashed into Your Name, like a wave. They were alone in this. No backup, no safety net. This wasn't a mere HOA conflict. This wasn't even just about Karen. This was something bigger, something far more dangerous. But why me? Before they could think further, the door to the basement creaked open. The man in black stepped in, his figure outlined against the dim light. His eyes, cold and unfeeling, fixed on Your Name. Behind him, Karen stood, arms crossed, an eerie smile curving on her lips. "You've been a thorn in our side for too long," Karen said, her voice smooth but tinged with malice. "We could have let you go, let you walk away. But you just had to dig deeper, didn't you?" Your Name didn't respond. The game had shifted from one of survival to one of revelation. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was a part of a covered operation, something far darker than they could have imagined. And they had stumbled into it. The man in black moved forward, his hand reaching for the folder hidden inside the safe. But as his fingers brushed the lock, a low voice interrupted. "Not so fast." Your Name's heart skipped a beat. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the basement with deliberate ease. The light caught his face. It was their CIA contact. But there was something different about him. The coldness in his eyes was unmistakable. "You think you can get away with this, Karen?" the CIA agent said, his voice as steely as ever. "We've known about your operation for months. All your moves, every one of your associates, including this one," he gestured toward the man in black, "has been under surveillance." The world seemed to pause. Karen's smile faltered. You've been playing me." The CIA agent didn't flinch. "You've been exposed. All of it. Your illegal operations, your ties to organized crime. It's over." A cold rage flickered in Karen's eyes. In that instant, the veil lifted. Karen wasn't just an innocent bystander in this plot. She was the mastermind. But then something even more shocking happened. The man in black, instead of turning to run, stepped forward and drew a weapon, pointing it squarely at the CIA agent. "Not so fast," he sneered. "You think you've won. You're just a pawn, same as your name. This was never about them. This was about power. And it's ours now. The shock of the moment hit like a punch to the gut. The CIA agent wasn't just part of the solution. He was part of the problem. Everything clicked into place. The false assurances, the lies, the surveillance. It was all part of a much larger conspiracy than your name could have imagined. The CIA agent was one of Karen's operatives. They had been led to believe they were on the side of justice, but in reality, they had been manipulated from the start. But just as the weapon in the man's hand began to raise, your name lunged, tackling him to the ground. A struggle ensued, chaotic and wild, but in the end, your name emerged victorious, the weapon in their hands. The man in black lay unconscious, and Karen's smirk had faded entirely. The truth had finally been revealed. Karen wasn't just a villain in a neighborhood drama. She was part of a covert, criminal network operating right under the nose of the government, and now your name had the power to expose everything. And as they stood over the two defeated figures, the truth was clear. The real battle was just beginning.